Hello, I'm gonna be reading a new book from John Steinbeck of Mice and Men. So, I'm gonna start reading from for like 5 or 6 pages. All right, a few miles south of Soledad, the Salinas River drops in close to the hillside bank and runs deep and green. The water is warm too, for it has slipped twinkling over the yellow sand in the sunlight before reaching this narrow pool. On one side of the river, the golden foothill slopes curve up to the strong and rocky Gavilan Mountains, but on the valley side, the water is lined with trees, willows, fresh and green with every spring, carrying their lower leaf junctures, the debris of the water fluting, and sycamores with mottled white recumbent limbs and branches that arc over the pool. On the sandy bank under the trees, the leaves lie deep and so crisp that a lizard makes a great skittering if he runs among them. Rabbits come out of the brush to sit on the sand in the evening, and damp flats are covered with the night tracks of coons, and with the spread pads of dogs from the ranches, and with the split wedge tracks of deer that come to drink in dark. There is a path through the willows, and among the sycamores, a path beaten hard by boys coming down from the ranches to swim in the deep pool, and beaten hard by tramps who come wearily down from the highway in the evening to jungle up near water. In front of the low horizontal limb of a giant sycamore, there is an ash pile made by many fires. The limb is worn smooth by men who have sat on it. Evening of a hot day started the little wind to moving among the leaves. The shade climbed up the hills toward the top. On the sand banks, the rabbits sat as quickly as little gray, sculptured stones. And then from the direction of the state highway came the sound of footsteps on crisp sycamore leaves. The rabbits hurried noiselessly for cover. A stilted heron labored up into the air and pounded down river. For a moment the place was lifeless, and then two men emerged from the path and came into the opening by the green pool. They had walked in single file down the path, and even in the open one stayed behind the other. Both were dressed in denim trousers and in denim coats with brass buttons. Both wore black, shapeless hats, and both carried tight blanket rolls slung over their shoulders. The first man was small and quick, dark of face, with restless eyes and sharp, strong features. Every part of him was defined: small, strong hand, slender arms, a thin and bony nose. Behind him walked his opposite, a huge man, shapeless of face, with large pale eyes, with wide sloping shoulders, and he walked heavily, dragging his feet a little, the way a bear drags his paws. His arms did not swing at his sides, but had loosely. The first man stopped short in the cleaning, and the follower nearly ran over him. He took off his hat and whipped his sweatband with his forefinger, and snapped the moisture off. The huge companion dropped his blankets and flung himself down and drank from the surface of the green pool. Drank with long gulps, snorting into the water like a horse. The small man stepped nervously beside him. "Lenny," he said sharply. "Lenny, for God. 6 don't drink too much." Lenny continued to snort into the pool. The small man leaned over and shook him by the shoulder. "Lenny, you gotta be sick like you was last night." Lenny dipped his whole head under, hat and all, and then he sat up on the bank, and his hat dripped down on his blue coat and ran down his back. "That's good. That's good," he said. "You drink some, George. You take a good big drink." He smiled happily. George unslung his bindle and dropped it gently on the bank. "I ain't sure it's good water," he said. "Looks kinda scummy." Lenny dabbled his big paw in the water and wiggled his fingers so the water arose in little splashes. Rings widened across the pool to the other side and came back again. Lenny watched them go. "Look, George, look what I done." George knelt beside the pool and drank from his hand with quick scoops. "Tastes all right," he admitted. "Don't really seem to be running, though." "You never ought to drink water when it ain't running, Lenny," he said hopelessly. "You'd drink out of a gutter if you was thirsty." He threw a scoop of water into his face and rubbed it about with his hand under his chin and around the back of his neck. Then he replaced his hat, pushed himself back from the river, drew up his knees, and embraced them. Lenny, who had been watching, imitated George exactly. He pushed himself back, drew up his knees, embraced them, looked over to George to see whether he had it just right. He pulled his hat down a little more over his eyes. The way George sat was. George stared morosely at the water. The rims of his eyes were red with sun glare. He said angrily, "We could just as well of rode clear to the ranch if that bastard bus driver knew what he was talking about. Just a little stretch down the highway," he says. "Just a little stretch. Goddamn near 4 miles. That's what it was. Didn't want to stop at the ranch gate. That's what. Too goddamn lazy to pull up. Wonder he isn't too damn good to stop in the Soledad at all. Kicks us out and says, 'Just a little stretch down the road.' I bet it was more than 4 miles. Damn hot day." Lenny looked timidly over to him. "George? Yeah, what do you want?" "Where going, George?" The little man jerked down the brim of his hat and scowled over at Lenny. "So you forgot that already? Did you? I gotta tell it again, do I? Jesus Christ, you're a crazy bastard." "I forgot," Lenny said softly. "I tried not to forget. Honest to God, I did, George." Okay, I'll tell you again. I ain't got nothing to do. Might just as well spend all my time telling you things and then you forget 'em. And I tell you again. Tell you again. Tried and tried, said Lenny, but it didn't do no good. But it didn't do no good. And remember about the rabbits, George. The hell with the rabbits. That's all you ever can remember is them rabbits. Okay, now listen. And this time you got to remember, so we don't get into trouble. In no trouble. You remember sitting in that gutter on Howard Street and watching that blackboard. Lenny's face broke into a delighted smile. Why, sure, George, I remember that. But what we do then? I remember some girls come by and you say, the hell with that, the hell with that, the hell with that, the hell with what I says. You remember about us going into Murray and Reddy's, and they give us work cards and bus tickets. Oh sure, George, I remember that now. His hand went quickly into his side coat pocket. He said gently, George, I ain't got mine. I must have lost it. He looked down at the ground in despair. You never had one, you crazy bastard. I got both of them here. Think I'd let you carry your own work card. Lenny grinned with relief. I thought I put it in my side pocket. His hand went into the pocket again. George looked sharply at him. What do you take out? What do you take out of that pocket? What do you take out of the bucket? Ain't a thing in my pocket, Lenny said cleverly. I know they're in. You got it in your hand. What do you got in your hand? Hiding it. I ain't got nothing, George, honest. Come on, give it here. Lenny held his closed hand away from George's direction. It's only a mouse, George. A mouse? A live mouse? Just that mouse. That mouse, George. I didn't kill it, honest. I found it dead. Give it here, said George. Oh, leave me have it, George. Give it here. Lenny's closed hand slowly obeyed. George took the mouse and threw it across the board to the other side, among the brush. What you want of a dead mouse, anyways? I could pet it with my thumb while we walked along, said Lenny. Well, you ain't putting no mice while you walked with me. You remember where we going now? Lenny looked startled, and then in embarrassment hid his face against his knees. I forgot again. Jesus Christ. George said resignedly. Well, look, we're gonna work on a ranch like the one we come from up north. Up north? In Weed. Oh sure, I remember in Weed. That ranch we're going to is right down there about a quarter mile. We're gonna go in and see the boss. Now, look, I'll give him the work tickets, but you ain't gonna say a word. You just stand there and don't say nothing. If he finds out what a crazy bastard you are, we won't get no job. If he sees your work before he hears your talk, we're set. You got that? You got that? Sure, George. Sure, got it. Okay. Now, when we go into the boss, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? Lenny thought. His face grew tight with thought. I ain't got to say nothing. Just gonna stand there. Good boy. That's swell. You say that over 2-3 times, so you sure won't forget it. Lenny droned to himself softly. I ain't gonna say nothing. I ain't gonna say nothing. I ain't gonna say nothing. Okay, said George. And you ain't gonna do no bad things like you done in weed, neither? Neither. Lenny looked puzzled. Like I had done in weed? Oh, so you forgot it that too, did ya? Well, I ain't gonna remind you, fear you to do it again. A light of understanding broke on Lenny's face. They run us out of weed, he exploded triumphantly. Run us out, hell. Run us out, hell, said George disgustedly. We run. They was looking for us, but they didn't catch us. Lenny giggled happily. I didn't forget that, you bet. George lay back on the sand and crossed his hands under his head, and Lenny imitated him, raising his head to see whether he were doing it right. God, you're a lot of trouble, said George. I could get along so easy and so nice if I didn't have you on my tail. I could live so easy and maybe have a girl. For a moment, Lenny lay quiet, and then he said hopefully, we gotta work on the ranch, George. All right, you got that. But we're gonna sleep here because I got a reason. The day was going fast now. Only the tops of the Gavilan Mountains flamed with the light of the sun that had gone from the valley. A water snake slimmed along the pool. Its head held up like a little periscope. The reeds jerked slightly in the current. Far off toward the highway, a man shouted something, and another man shouted back. The sycamore limbs wrestled under a little wind that died immediately. George, why ain't we going on to the ranch and get some supper? They got supper at the ranch. George rolled on his side. No reason at all for you. I like it here. Tomorrow we're gonna go to work. I seen thrashing machines on the way down. That means we'll be bucking grain bugs, busting a gut. Tonight I'm gonna lay right here and look up. I like it. Lenny got up on his knees and looked down at George. Ain't we gonna have no supper? Sure we are. If you gather up some dead willow sticks. I got 3 cans of beans in my bino. You get a fire ready. I'll give you a match when you get the stick together. When we'll heat the beans and have supper. Lenny said, I like beans with ketchup. Well, we ain't got no ketchup. You go get wood, and don't you fool around. It will be dark before dawn. Lenny lumbered to his feet and disappeared in the brush. George lay where he was and whistled softly to himself. There were sounds of splashing down the river in the direction Lenny had taken. George stopped whistling and listened. Poor bastard, he said softly, and then went on whistling again. In a moment, Lenny came crashing back through the brush. He carried one small willow stick in his hand. George sat up. All right, he said brusquely, give me that mouse. But Lenny made an elaborate pantomime of innocence. What mouse, George? I ain't got no mouse. George held his hand. Come on, give it to me. You ain't putting nothing over. Lenny hesitated, backed away, looked widely at the brush line as though he contemplated running for his freedom. George said coldly, you gotta give me that mouse Or do I have to sock you? Give you what, George? You know goddamn well that what? I want that mouse. Lenny reluctantly reached into his pocket. His voice broke a little. I don't know why I can't keep it. It ain't nobody's mouse. I didn't steal it. I found it laying right beside the road. George's hand remained outstretched imperiously, slowly, like a terrier who doesn't want to bring a ball to its master. Lenny approached, drew back, approached again. George snapped his fingers sharply, and at the sound, Lenny laid the mouse in his hand. I wasn't doing nothing bad with it, George, just stroking it. George stood up and threw the mouse as far as he could into the darkening brush, and then he stepped to the pool and washed his hands. You crazy fool! Don't you think I could see your feet was wet where you went across the river to get it? He heard Lenny's whimpering cry and wailed about, blubbering like a baby. Jesus Christ, a big guy like you. Lenny's lip quivered and tears started in his eyes. Oh, Lenny, George put his hand on Lenny's shoulder. I ain't taking away just for meanness. That mouse ain't fresh, Lenny. And besides, you broke it petting it. You get another mouse that's fresh and I'll let you keep it a little while. Alright, that's it. That's for today. And I read from page 3 to page 11. I'm gonna continue the next day and from page 11 where Lenny sat down on the ground. Alright, that's for today. If you liked the video, and please subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.